And the really scary thing is if you are distracting yourself from the anxiety during the day, there's a really good chance that you're actually making it worse at night. So for some amount of time, and this is where you can meditate, you can exercise, you can go for a walk and let the anxiety flow, baby. If you wait until you're too tired, it will become harder to fall asleep. There are a lot of people who have anxiety. And for many of these people, this anxiety gets way worse at night, okay? So this is like my favorite example of this, where it's like, okay, when you're awake, you kind of push down the anxiety, you suppress it. It's like you manage to survive and distract yourself through the day. But then when you lay down, the anxiety spreads and now it's in your brain and it causes you problems. And that's something that a lot of people will experience, right? So why does my anxiety get 10 times worse at night? During the day, I can usually manage. I keep busy. I focus on work. I push the thoughts aside. But the second it's nighttime and things quiet down, my brain turns into the loudest thing in the room. Every worry I shoved away all comes back. Bills, relationships, future plans, regrets. I'll try to go to sleep, but instead I toss and turn until 3 a.m. I'll sometimes jump into calls with friends or even play around on my prize, so I just don't feel alone, but the anxiety still lingers. Does anyone deal with this? Why is anxiety so much worse at night, and how do you calm it? So it is fascinating, but anxiety is way worse at night. And that is because that is the way that we have evolved. There are all kinds of neuroscience mechanisms that make anxiety worse at night. And the really scary thing is that one of the reasons, probably one of the biggest reasons why anxiety is worse at night, that is not evolution, is that the way that we deal with anxiety makes it worse at night. So a lot of people will go through during the day and they will occupy themselves to distract themselves to ignore the anxiety. And the really scary thing is if you are distracting yourself from the anxiety during the day, there's a really good chance that you're actually making it worse at night. So sometimes as a psychiatrist, I work with patients who come up with solutions to their problems. The problem is that sometimes their solution creates another problem. And the moment that your solution creates a different problem, now you're stuck. Because if your solution is making a problem, then you're kind of like, you're winning over here, you're losing over here. But if you let go of your solution, then the original problem kind of comes back. So this is going to be a more neuroscience heavy lecture. If you guys are having trouble following, please let me know, okay? So the first thing that we're going to talk about is circadian rhythm. So this is a paper about night shift work. But the first thing that I want to show y'all is we have this hormone called cortisol, okay? And this is the normal level, this is the normal curve for cortisol throughout our body. So cortisol is at an all-time low at midnight, it spikes in the morning, and then it decreases throughout the day, and then it's low at night. So our circadian rhythm is our 24-hour biological clock, okay? Actually, it's maybe about 25 hours, but 24-hour biological clock. So our body is not the same at every hour of the day. And one of the key things that changes is cortisol. So we saw that cortisol curve, right? Where at midnight, it's low. It kind of peaks around maybe like 7 a.m. and then it decreases throughout the day and then it's low by like 6 p.m. Okay? This is what a normal cortisol curve looks like. Cortisol is a stress hormone. It makes you feel awake. It makes you active. It kind of turns you on. It revs you up. It increases blood pressure, increases heart rate, increases immune activity. It increases blood sugar, okay? So it revs you up. So there are studies that show that people who have anxiety disorders have a disrupted cortisol curve. They have something called a flattened cortisol curve. So this is the normal cortisol curve, but their cortisol curve looks more like this, something like that. Actually, that's probably not correct. So this is the peak. So their cortisol will peak and then it'll go down like this. Okay? So their cortisol curve doesn't have highs, doesn't have lows. So this is the first reason, because literally there is a hormone in your body that is keeping you awake. Now this becomes important because if we want to alter our cortisol levels, one of the best way to alter cortisol levels is our psychological stress. So the way that we deal with stress will increase cortisol or decrease cortisol, okay? So people do have circadian rhythm problems for sure. Second thing, incredibly fascinating. So if we look at studies on narcolepsy, if you want to understand how something in the brain works, The best way to understand it is by looking at a disorder or disease where that part of the brain is messed up. So if I want to understand how a car works and I remove, I don't know, if I take all the oil out of the car, I will very quickly discover what the role of oil is. If I want to understand how a wheel works, if I remove a wheel, I will see changes in the car that tells me what the wheel is doing. So when we look at disorders like narcolepsy, which is when people fall asleep, and cataplexy, which is when they get paralyzed and fall asleep, that's when we will see a couple of very important things about how the brain works, okay? So there are two circuits that we're going to talk about, the frontal lobe and the amygdala. The amygdala is our negative emotional center of the brain. It is also our stress and our survival center, okay? So this gives us anxiety and fear. When we're afraid and anxious, the amygdala is lit up. So why is this our survival center of the brain? Because if we think about what's the role of fear, when I'm like walking through the woods and I see a grizzly bear, fear is what keeps me alive, right? So the amygdala is there to keep us alive. Now here's what's really, really, really interesting. When we go to bed, our amygdala activity increases naturally. It's supposed to increase. Now, this is what's really fascinating. Why? Why does our amygdala become hypersensitive when we go to bed? There are 2 or 3 reasons for that. The first is when we go to sleep, I'm going to ask y'all a question. When you sleep, do you experience emotion? Yes or no? What do y'all think? When do you experience the most intense? Hold on a second. When do you experience the most intense emotion? Oh, whoops. When do you experience the most intense emotion throughout the day? When you're awake or when you're asleep? Very good. Dreaming in nightmares. So nightmares, the whole point of a nightmare is that it's like terrifying, right? Hey y'all, if you're interested in applying some of the principles that we share to actually create change in your life, check out Dr. K's Guide to Mental Health. There are actually 2 sources for anxiety. One is cognitive and one is physiologic. For the majority of people, reassurance becomes something that you become dependent on. You're not really dealing with the root of the anxiety, and it sort of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy where the more socially anxious you become, the more awkward you appear, and then it kind of becomes this vicious cycle. So check out the link in the bio and start your journey today. So now I want y'all to understand this for a moment. If a nightmare is terrifying, which part of your brain does that terror come from? It comes from the amygdala. That's when it turns on, we feel fear. It's like 1-to-1, literally the point. So there's a good chance that the reason that we dream and the reason that we have nightmares is to process our emotions. And in order for us to process our emotions, they can't be in read-only mode. They have to be in edit mode. We have to work through them. And one of the ways that we do that is through nightmares. So as a clinician, when I have a patient who has a lot of nightmares, as we work through their nightmares, their emotional state gets better during the day. And as their emotional state, if we work on their anxiety during the day, the nightmares decrease at night. Okay, this is why Freud and Jung were so into dreams. Great book, Memories, Dreams, and Reflections by Carl Jung. So back in the day when we had these like psychoanalysts and they started like discovering emotions, they figured out really early on, they stumbled into this idea that the dreams we have correlate with the emotions that we experience. And one of the ways that our brain deals with emotions is through dreaming, okay? So amygdala becomes hyperactive, therefore anxiety is going to increase. Here's the other thing. The frontal lobe is the part of our brain that controls other parts of our brain. And it is the source of willpower, restraint, discipline, focus. So when I'm awake during the day and I'm like, I start to feel anxious, there's a part of my brain that's like, we ain't got time for that. We gotta read Memories, Dreams, and Reflections. We gotta get through 50 pages of this today because they're going to talk about it in class tomorrow. So there's a part of your brain that controls your emotions. The frontal lobe also suppresses the amygdala, shuts it off, says, hey, calm down. But the frontal lobe gets drained. So if you've done a lot of emotional suppression, you feel exhausted at the end of the day. If you've exerted a lot of willpower, you run out. Willpower is actually a diminishing resource that your frontal lobes start with. So the frontal lobe can't be active for 24 hours a day. And we need it when we're awake, which means that as we go to bed, the frontal lobe shuts off. It decreases in activity. This is also a feature. But as the frontal lobe shuts off, our ability to suppress our anxiety decreases. This is why nighttime anxiety is so much worse, because the part of our brain that experiences anxiety turns on more, and the part of our brain that reduces anxiety is like, hey, bruh, I need to rest, right? And if you think about what happens to your willpower if you get a good night's rest, what happens to your willpower if you don't get a good night's rest? The frontal lobe recovers when we sleep. This is probably the biggest reason why nighttime anxiety gets worse. But there are more, okay? Number 3, this is where we get to distraction, and why distracting yourself from anxiety is one of the worst things that you can do for your sleep. So normally, here's me, and I'm anxious, okay? I'm worried. So what do? I use external stimuli to push away the anxiety. So there's a great example of this. During the day, I can usually keep myself distracted, but the second I try to go to bed, my thoughts start racing. I replay conversations, worry about things I can't control, and imagine the worst case scenario for tomorrow. It's exhausting. Not only is it exhausting, you are already exhausted. Why are you exhausted? Because your frontal lobes have been suppressing your anxiety all day long, okay? So what happens is I feel anxious, and then I distract myself. I use external stimuli. I pull my attention away from my anxiety. Make sense? But there's a problem with this. Because when my brain is experiencing anxiety in my amygdala, what am I conditioning myself to do to regulate anxiety? How am I training my brain? I have eyes over here that go to the occipital lobe in the back. The occipital lobe is actually way better, right? I have ears, which go to my auditory cortex. So I have eyes and ears, and I'm horribly misshapen as a human being. Right, so this is auditory, this is occipital. Actually, Broca's area, I think, is more over here, but whatever. So what I'm training myself to do is, when anxious, use external stimuli to reduce anxiety. So I'm not training myself to regulate my anxiety via my physiology. I'm not training myself to regulate my anxiety using cognitive reframing, right? I'm training myself to suppress my anxiety either through drugs or sensory distractions. That's what my brain learns, right? That's the way we deal with our anxiety all day long. Stay busy, stay busy, stay busy. Don't think about it. Distract yourself, distract yourself, distract yourself. So if distraction is my method of regulating anxiety and I go to sleep, there's a problem, because when I sleep, there's a sensory deprivation. There isn't external stimuli, right? The external stimuli goes away. That's the whole point. I close my eyes. So what I've actually done is I've conditioned myself to use distractions to control my anxiety. If you put me in a non-distractible state, then the anxiety will come roaring back, and will oftentimes come back even harder because you've been suppressing it this whole time, right? It's been piling up. It's been piling up. Right? It started down here, and you're distracting. It's building up. And then there's so much of it that it doesn't just end up in your arm, it ends up in your head. And sometimes, if you're not careful, it'll fill up all of the head, and there'll only be one arm that is not full of anxiety. So there's another part of our brain that activates when we go to bed, and that is the default mode network. So the default mode network is our self-referential processing. So if we sort of look at these posts, right? Worry about things I can't control, imagine worst case scenarios, replay conversations. And if we sort of look at this, I keep busy, I push my thoughts aside, every worry comes back. So I toss and turn, bills, relationships, future plans, regrets all flood at once. So I don't know if this makes sense, but the things that we worry about, oftentimes when we're anxious, relate to ourselves. So oftentimes when we're anxious, right, we're worried, oh, did I screw this up? Did I mess that up? So the default mode network activates. And there's research that shows that when we go to bed at night, the default mode network also increases in activity. So what's natural to think about when we go to bed? We think about ourselves. We think about the day. We think about tomorrow. That's also a feature, not a bug. So we're trying to think about ourselves a little bit, processing, thinking about what we could do differently. But this is also why if you have anxiety and depression, this is really, really, really bad. People with anxiety and people with depression will both have problems with insomnia. And when you have both of them together, it's because of the hyperactivity of the default mode network that really triggers both. So you start thinking about yourself a lot. The last thing to talk about is melatonin. And there are studies that show that people who have difficulty with nighttime anxiety. Accordingly, dysfunctions in melatonin production and rhythms have been hypothesized to contribute to insomnia chronicity, okay? So melatonin does a couple of really important things for the brain. One of the things that it does is it increases GABAergic tone. So what is GABA? GABA is a hyperpolarizing neurotransmitter. This means that it increases chloride transmission across the neuron. When you hyperpolarize a neuron, it's kind of counterintuitive. That means that the neuron is more likely to shut off. So this is a suppressing neurotransmitter. Good examples of things that activate GABA, i.e. suppress things, alcohol and benzodiazepines both work on increasing GABA transmission. So melatonin also shuts things off. Okay, now let's understand how this works. Here's my amygdala. I'm increasing amygdalar activity when I go to sleep so that I can process through dreams. There's another reason I'm increasing the hypersensitivity of the amygdala, and that's because, remember, so when we go to sleep, this is really fascinating. We want to be in a safe place. So when we sleep, y'all ever thought about this? We want to be in a safe place, but our sensitivity to danger increases. That's why we want to be in a safe place. So I want to be in a room. I want to make sure my alarm is on in the house. The door is locked. I'm under a blanket. The windows are closed. I want to be safe. But your ability to hear things actually increases. So we increase our threat perception and we create a safe environment to compensate for that so that I can go to sleep, right? Because what do I want? I want my brain to be able to detect someone opening a door, breaking a window or something like that. But I also want to be in a safe place because if I'm in a normal area, right? I don't know if y'all have ever tried to sleep in an airport and how paranoid you feel sleeping in an airport. What if someone steals my stuff? You pile up all your stuff, you put your legs on top. Y'all ever done that? Where you're like, when you fall asleep in a public place, you're like extra paranoid that people are going to steal your stuff? Of course. That's because your amygdala is becoming hyperactive. So we try to create an environment that is safe, but we actually amp up our threat detection, okay? Second thing is frontal lobes, which normally inhibit, and this is the sign for inhibition in like physiology. This gets shut off. So we need something to compensate. That's where melatonin comes in. So melatonin goes over here, increases GABA tone, and basically balances things out, right? So this is going to be suppressive, actually. So we're going to increase our suppression. We're going to increase our action, and then everything works out the way that it's supposed to. Except if you have an anxiety disorder or you struggle with anxiety, this melatonin production gets messed up. So now we don't have something that is shutting off the amygdala. The amygdala is becoming hyperactive. So how do we deal with this? How do we fix it? First thing, you can go see a psychiatrist, go see a therapist. It can help a lot. First thing that we got to do, increase pro-sleep signals. Exercise, heavy meal, insulin spike, carb-heavy dinner can work great, okay? So how easy it is for you to fall asleep depends on how you spend your day. So when your body feels like the day is over, when you've done enough work, we have a whole video about this or multiple. When you've done enough work, then your body is like, okay, fine. Your brain is like, we did a good job today. Now we can go to sleep. If you procrastinated all day, then what's going to happen is your brain is going to say, oh, we were supposed to do all this stuff. Remember all that shit you were supposed to do that you didn't do? It's going to be like the day can't be over yet because then we're going to have twice as much stuff to do more. It's going to keep you awake. Increase your pro-sleep signals. Second thing, don't distract from anxiety, at least exclusively. Because if I tell you don't distract yourself from your anxiety, your response is going to be, then how the hell am I supposed to do anything? I will be completely non-functional if I don't distract myself from my anxiety. I get that. I do. I've had tons of patients who will tell me that, Dr. K, I can't distract myself. If I don't distract myself, then I'm not going to get anything done. Turns out that that's not the case. Okay. So here's the cool thing. If you don't distract yourself from your anxiety, you will start triggering homeostatic mechanisms. What does this mean? This means that anytime my body or brain feels an emotion, it automatically starts certain processes to turn the emotion off. When I feel joy, that joy doesn't last forever. It automatically expires. So when I feel anxiety, this is going to be hard for people with anxiety disorders, but we'll talk about this, right? It actually automatically expires. Now, why would people with anxiety disagree with this? For two reasons. The first is that the duration and intensity of anxiety in an anxiety disorder are both higher. The second thing is that technically the anxiety does expire, but you create new anxiety through things like rumination. Rumination isn't the propagation. So when I create an anxiety thought, this is what happens, right? The thought starts, anxiety increases, and then it goes down. The problem with rumination is in the middle, I start creating another thought, and then this will happen, and then this will happen, and then this will happen. It's not that you don't have homeostasis. It's that the process of rumination is creating additional thoughts, which is what creates the spiral. We must be precise about this. Your anxiety will go away. That's why stopping rumination becomes really important. We have a whole video about that. It's a whole topic in and of itself. The key thing is that the more you distract yourself, the more the anxiety is going to build up and the more of it that you're going to have when you go to sleep. So for some amount of time, and this is where you can meditate, you can exercise, you can go for a walk and let the anxiety flow, baby. Going for a walk is great. Going for an hour-long walk, really good for your anxiety. Spending time with animals, really good for your anxiety. Let the thoughts flow. So if you work with someone like a professional and you can do some cognitive reframing or a CBT worksheet or something like that, you have to target your anxiety in a direct way. The other thing that you can do to regulate your anxiety, we want to regulate it, not distract from it, is breathing. This is huge. Your breathing, if you can take deep breaths with particularly long exhalations. So we'll teach a practice called Kapalbhati or Nadi Shuddhi Pranayam. These are the two that I tend to use in my patients with anxiety. Or Sheetal Pranayam also works really well. Sheetal Pranayam is really easy. You just go like this, make a taco with your tongue, and you breathe through it. Now, why does Sheetal Pranayam work? Because the speed of exhalation and inhalation is automatically slowed down. When we feel anxious, we are likely to hyperventilate. We want to slow down the feeling of anxiety. We want to slow down the rate of respiration, decrease the number of breaths per minute, increase the length of exhalation, and then our anxiety will hopefully get better, right? Engages the parasympathetic nervous system. There's a lot of good data behind that. So don't distract yourself. Third thing, not the most important thing, everything's the most important thing. So melatonin can be helpful. Definitely something you should talk to your doctor about. Get evaluated for an insomnia disorder, circadian rhythm disorder. There are all kinds of treatments for that. Third thing, don't miss, this is huge, your sleep window. This is what a lot of people don't understand. You have a window per day in which it is easy to fall asleep. If you miss that window, it is hard to fall asleep. See, one of the biggest mistakes that we make is we assume that the more tired we are, the easier it is to fall asleep. That's incorrect. The more tired you are, it becomes harder to fall asleep until you reach a point of critical tiredness that is like passing out. Do y'all understand how subjectively falling asleep and passing out are different? And have you noticed that you can't pass out immediately after you would have fallen asleep? There's always a big gap between falling asleep and being able to pass out. Do y'all get that? These are two very different mechanisms. And here's the big thing that people don't understand. I learned this with my kids, by the way. So your frontal lobes are responsible for controlling the other parts of your brain and suppressing the other parts of your brain. So when you go to sleep, it actually requires willpower to go to sleep. What do I mean by, willpower is a resource, not like you have to be like a stoic, like willpower dude, but like literally your brain requires energy to fall asleep because in order to fall asleep, you have to shut down the parts of your mind. So when you go to sleep, if your frontal lobes have some energy left, then they can shut off. It's basically like I'm shutting down the factory and there's a factory worker who's going around and turning off all the machines, right? It takes energy to shut down the factory. The factory doesn't just shut off on its own. It takes a lot of energy to shut down the factory. So we each have a sleep window where our frontal lobes have enough juice to where we can suppress our amygdala. We can stop ourselves from getting we can have this is huge. We can have the willpower to not pull out our phones. We can have the willpower to not turn on the TV. We can have the willpower to read instead of turning on the TV. That requires willpower. Going to sleep requires willpower. Sitting your ass down and being bored in bed for 28 minutes while you fall asleep requires a lot of willpower. So this is why if we reach a critical point of tiredness, in which point, what do we mean by tired? If the frontal lobes become too exhausted, they can no longer suppress the other parts of our brain. And then we enter into this severe tiredness phase where our only option now is passing out. And then the fatigue signals need to be so high that we end up passing out. But then we are even more fatigued, and a full night's sleep is not going to recover from that. A full night's sleep will recover from the right sleep window. Does that kind of make sense? Because now we're like extra fatigued. We're like bonus fatigued. Now we're like staying up till 3 a.m. and you know, even if you wake up at 11, you're still going to be groggy. So when I was like trying to put my kids to bed, I noticed that if I miss this window, there's like a window where I'm like, okay, beta, time to get into bed. Let's do cuddles. Let's do a story, right? And then it's like, okay, it's bedtime now. I'm going to give you a kiss. Good night. I'll see you tomorrow. And then the kid grabs her little stuffy and she goes to sleep. But if it's late, if it's like 10:30, if it's past their bedtime, it's like, okay, do we have time for a story? Let's do a story. And they're like, I have to go to the bathroom. And now I need water. And now, no, I can't. Like, I need this stuff. You know, it's in the other room. There's just one thing I have to do. They just go insane. Their frontal lobes are completely shot. They can't sit still. I'm like, get under the covers, close your eyes. They can't close their eyes. They're like getting up and now I got to do this. Now I got to do this. I got to do this. We miss their sleep window and then it becomes twice as hard to put them to bed. And then there's yelling and then there's crying and then there's frustration and then there's tickling. Right? Because tickle. Got to get that energy out of them. You got too much energy. You got the energy monkeys in your armpits. Let's get them out. Chasing that energy monkey in your armpit. Right? Like then you can't control yourself. And self-control is necessary for sleep. So don't miss your sleep window. Huge. Right? Generally speaking, your sleep window will start about 16 hours after you wake up. Maybe a little bit lower, maybe 14 hours, 15 hours. And you have to go to sleep when you have enough energy to be able to stay in bed. That's how you know. Somewhere between 8 and 10 p.m., watching the sunset is a huge part of that. You know, spending some time outdoors when it's getting dark, after it's been dark, then going to bed. And you got to go to sleep before you're ready. That's actually when it's easiest to fall asleep. If you wait until you're too tired, it will become harder to fall asleep. And that, boys and girls, is nighttime anxiety. If y'all want to understand other things like this, like some of these physiologic things, so we have a video on rumination. If y'all want more stuff on anxiety specifically, check out Dr. K's guide. We've got a lot of good stuff on physiologic anxiety that people were stunned. They're like, holy shit, I didn't know this is how anxiety works. Remember, 50% of your anxiety comes from your body. So there's a lot that you can do there. Dietary things and things like that, okay? Hey y'all, hope you enjoyed today's video. We talk about a bunch of topics like this on the channel, so be sure to subscribe for more. If you're already subscribed, GG, and we'll see you in chat.